Welcome to this evening's presentation of college application spike, more than COVID-19, and how that spike will impact you, whether you're a student, a parent, a counselor, and not just this year, but next year and possibly future years as well. So we are recording live. You'll be able to gain access to this recording after this evening, and we are on both Facebook and YouTube. Sounds like there is still a recording issue. Okay, hopefully it is working. If you go to the actually slight typo on this screen, it's SCORE webinar singular, but if you go to the SCORE webinar screen where you signed up for this webinar, you're going to see that there are lots of downloads associated with the presentation this evening that you'll be able to download either during the webinar or at any time afterwards, things that will reinforce pretty much everything that I'm going to be sharing with you this evening. And there are lots of things that you're going to learn about the changes that took place this year, whether you should be considering taking the SAT or going test optional, when to send scores to colleges, how you can make your application really sparkle and stand out. So there's a lot of information I'd like to cover with you this evening. So what changed? Honestly, everything changed. According to the Dean of Admission, J.T. Duck at Tufts University, everything changed for students, for the search process, and certainly everything changed within college admission offices and the ways in which they interact with students. And so how did these changes come about? Well, COVID-19 reduced SAT and ACT testing opportunities, which led a number of colleges that previously required SAT and ACT scores to go test optional. And instead of students being able to come and visit campuses in person for tours or information sessions or attending a class, instead colleges found robust ways in which to reach students through virtual presentations, emails, social media, and increased dialogue between college admission officers and high school counselors, so that many, many more students could be reached. And in fact, through the internet, and perhaps one of the positive changes is that many, many more students were able to gain access to very in-depth information about colleges that they could not have gotten as easily before, because they certainly could not have gotten it from the comfort of their own homes. So let's go a little bit more specific in terms of exactly what changed. And this is an article that actually appeared in Inside Higher Ed. There is a link to this particular article that is on our webinar page, and it reflects data that Common App, which is the most commonly used application today in college admissions, data that Common App has collected and shared. So Common App is accepted by roughly 900 universities around not just the United States, but around the world. So this is some really big data that I think has messages not only for now, but for the future. So overall applications, Common App applications were up by 10%. And that reflected, more than 5.5 million applications so far. This is only through about a week or so ago, and almost 1 million students filing those applications. And the trends that we specifically saw were that applications were up for the larger and more competitive colleges, but applications were down for smaller colleges and less competitive colleges. And one of the very troubling pieces of data that surfaced was the fact that the applications are down for first generation and low income students, so that the gap between the haves and have-nots, not just in colleges, but in students, also appears to be widening. So getting even more specific, larger colleges on Common App, that is colleges that have at least 20,000 students, which is mainly state universities, not too many privates, saw an increase of 16% in applications, whereas the applications to the smallest colleges, those with fewer than 1,000 enrolled students, dropped by roughly 4%. So this is not even, around, for all colleges in the sense that applications spiked, but certainly to the larger, more selective universities. And in fact, for purposes of this presentation, selective is defined as any college that accepts less than 50% of its students. So we're not just talking, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Duke, Georgetown, WashU, Emory. We're including quite a few colleges when we're talking about selective universities. And these more selective universities definitely saw larger increases than the less selective colleges. And in fact, students applied to more colleges this year, actually 9% more per student than last year, which means that yield will be harder to predict. Yield is the percentage of accepted students who say yes back to the university. And admission offices have what are called enrollment managers to try to predict which students will say yes, which students will say no. It helps them determine the percentage of students they should actually admit and how many students put on their waiting list. And because of this really increased volume in applications, it will be much harder for them to predict yield. So we don't really quite know yet exactly what to expect from regular admission decisions. And I will go into some things that have happened early because we already have that data. And then in terms of the regional growth, colleges in the Southwest of the United States saw more growth in applications than any other part of our country, went up by over 20%, whereas colleges in the Mid-Atlantic region, where we have many, many more colleges concentrated, only saw a 6% increase. But yet international applications actually surged, and I've got them listed in increasing order of countries where the applications surged more than any other. And so you can see that there are quite a few countries that there were, really, I'd say, astronomical increases in the number of applications. However, this was not true for China. And China has previously sent the United States more college students than any other country. And this year, and not it's hard to say exactly why, but perhaps U.S. and Chinese relations have not been the best, but the applications from China have decreased by 18%. There are two exceptions to the large state universities getting more applications. The state university system in New York, SUNY, is down by 20%. I haven't seen an explanation of that yet. Cal State, which went, I believe, blind, test-free, and serves more of a local population throughout California, those applications went down by 5%. But I believe that it was counterbalanced by a surge in the University of California system, which was test optional this year, and where there seemed to be many more selective state universities, and perhaps because many kids who might have applied to Cal States were diverting their attention and applying more to the University of California system than Cal State system. That's just, sort of my guess on it. I don't know that that's, definitely a fact. But I think that there is, sort of an overriding, let me say, summary of this from Bob Massa, and you'll see I'm going to quote him later. Very well-known admission professional who's founded an Enrollment Intelligence now, but he has served as a admissions officer in the past at Johns Hopkins, and currently an emeritus admission dean from Dickinson College. And basically, what he is saying is that kids are hedging their bets because there's a lot of uncertainty with COVID-19 because kids could not visit colleges, and families are increasingly concerned about costs. So they're having their kids apply to more universities so that they can perhaps make more comparisons with financial aid packages, with merit-based scholarships, and basically hedge their bets that way. So there's a number of reasons why the applications are up very, very significantly this year. Because I'm here in Florida and so many of our listeners are Florida residents, I did want to highlight some of what's going on here in Florida. And this is just information that that was updated for me today. Florida has 12 state universities and I would say, 3 most competitive in terms of admission. FSU, Florida State University, actually is up by 10% for fall applications. Only slightly up if we put summer and fall combined, because here in Florida, for many of our state universities, you can apply for either summer or fall. UF, our other flagship university, along with FSU, applications are up slightly. And University of Central Florida, which is our largest state university, well over 50,000 undergraduate students, applications are down right now, but UCF has rolling admission, does not have a firm deadline like UF and FSU, so kids can actually apply through the spring there. And their admission director told me today that they anticipate being pretty even with last year by the end of the cycle. However, our smaller, more regional state universities seem to be down. I don't have any specific figures to report to you, but this is in line with what I've been saying this evening. The larger universities, the more competitive universities, their application numbers are way up. The smaller, less competitive universities, their numbers seem to be down. So basically, this theme here is, as you can see, there is definitely an unprecedented spike in college applications. And so much of that has been caused by the fact that 2/3 of colleges now are test optional. They're temporarily test optional because of COVID-19. So when a college goes test optional, more kids are going to wind up applying, because these are kids who may not have the scores that were previously thought of as, I don't want to say required, but the range of admitted students. Because there was so much confusion over the vast number of colleges, and perhaps 1,500 or 1,600 colleges actually became test optional this year, the National Association for College Admission Consulting, NACAC, National Association for College Admission Counselors, not consulting, sorry. Roughly, they came out with a pledge that says test optional means test optional. If you don't submit a test score, it's not going to hurt you. So roughly 1/3 of the colleges, and only 1/3 of the colleges that went test optional this year, signed the pledge. Not only do you have the link on the bottom of the screen to where that pledge is, but the link is also on the webinar sign-up page, where you'll be able to just click on it and find out exactly who signed and who did not sign. And I will single out a few of those universities this evening. So let me go into some definitions, because I don't want to assume that everyone just knows exactly what test optional means. Essentially, we are de-emphasizing the use of scores in admission decisions. I'd always believed in the past that the scores were the second most important thing in college admission for the majority of students, only superseded by the academic record. So scores were not the most important thing. They were certainly way up there, if not number 2, perhaps number 3 or number 4. But now those scores by so many of our universities are being completely de-emphasized. However, I have to tell you that test optional is not the same as test blind. And there are some colleges who are calling it test free or score free. Test blind is specifically when, if you submitted a score too bad, it's not going to be looked at even if you have a perfect 36. It's going to be completely ignored. It's as if there's a Band-Aid placed over it and we cannot see what that score is. And so there are some colleges this year that did go test blind, and that whether you submitted a score or didn't submit a score, it didn't matter because they just didn't even look. Whereas test optional, if you submitted your score was going to be used as part of your evaluation. So understand that even though the majority of the colleges right now are temporarily test optional, test scores still play a pretty important role in college admissions. But admissions is much more competitive for test optional schools because more students will absolutely apply. Let's face it, if I'm, pretty close to the top of my class. I've taken a very rigorous curriculum. I have, terrific grades, wonderful class rank, involved in 2 or 3 extracurriculars where I have major leadership roles. My teachers love me, but I'm just not a great test taker because I think I read a statistic that roughly 2/3 of kids have scores that align with their grades, but that means 1/3 don't. So there are going to be some really great kids who either just know that they're not, have not scored high, have not been able to score high, perhaps did not have the opportunity to take the test, but all of a sudden they feel empowered to apply if it's test optional because I believe that I have everything else I need. And I will go into in a little bit more detail in a few minutes about without scores, how our college is doing, still a holistic review as they place more emphasis on the 4 other things that I think are among the most important in college admission. Specifically, how are they putting more emphasis on, academics, extracurriculars, essays, and recommendations? When you are applying test optional, it's a decision that you make individually for each college. So it's not like you're saying, okay, I'm not sending my scores to anybody, although you might say that. It's more like, okay, for these 6 schools, I can send my scores, and for these 3 schools, I may not. It's your decision whether to send them or not. And of course, my advice is if you believe that your scores are competitive and will add to your application, you're going to submit them. If you don't feel they're going to add to your application, you just might not submit them, which means that you need to have familiarity with what were the ranges of SAT and ACT scores for admitted students last year. And many colleges have that on their website, and certainly, like US News and World Report and lots of other, internet sites will give you SAT and ACT ranges. But I will say that in the past, this is before COVID-19, non-submitters, in other words, the kids who did not submit their scores, were historically accepted at a lower rate than submitters. Several years ago, University of Chicago went test optional. They were one of the very first very highly selective universities to go test optional. However, the overwhelming majority of students who applied submitted scores, and they were also accepted at a far higher rate than the students who did not submit scores. However, going test optional sort of widened the field and wound up attracting a much wider, a much more diverse range of students in the application pool. If you want the full list of who is currently test optional, you can just go to fairtest.org and you'll find that list. But there's also a link on our webinar sign-up page that gives you the chronology of which colleges went test optional when, so you can actually see how things changed over time. The Florida State University system. They are the only state university system in the country that is not test optional. All 12 of our state universities still want scores. But interestingly, I showed you how at the larger universities, applications are even or even up a little bit, the larger, more selective state universities, and at the smaller, less selective ones, they seem to be down, and certainly, not in a uniform way. So our state universities definitely still want scores. And the Bright Futures Scholarship, which rewards Florida students for their academic performance, their test scores, as well as their commitment to community service, they still want scores. So here in Florida, our students are finding ways to take the SAT or ACT. And I can say that so many of our high schools, public high schools, private high schools, even the Score Academy schools, the schools that are part of Score at the top, offered a test day SAT, a test day ACT, so that our students who felt safe could come in a socially distanced and comfortable way to take an SAT or an ACT. So I think that many of the schools here in Florida did go out of their way to try to find ways to safely administer the SAT and the ACT. Just to give you some statistics, this is some, I think, significant information that I crowdsourced through the Independent Educational Consultants Association, of which I'm a proud member for probably 25 years or so now. As our students were getting emails from colleges with their admission decisions for early action, early decision, My colleagues were kind enough to share with me the information that their students had shared with them, to show you just how much universities skyrocketed in terms of their early applications. And yes, I know that this chart shows some of our nation's most selective universities, and it wasn't my intention to present in terms of, oh, these are what the very highly selective universities do, but understand that these tend to be the trendsetters. These are the universities that most people pay attention to. And yes, there are some universities on here that are not, Ivy League or exactly at that Ivy League level. And the normal increase from one year to the next in early would certainly be well under 10% for most schools. And you can see that some of these were 20, 30, 60% more, early. So it really made it for a much more competitive year in terms of early. And actually looking at the early admission rates of some of those highly selective universities, those where the rates have been published for last year and this year, you can see that, what do I have here, 8, 12, 10 universities, that the admission rate for this year, the percent admitted, is down. And this is pretty significant, especially if you look at a school, let's say like Johns Hopkins, going down from a 28% admit rate to an 11% admit rate. And one of the important things to know is that, our top universities, and again, the trendsetters, the ones that are the hardest to get into. I don't want you to think that I mean top in the sense that they are the best universities. They are just among the hardest to get into. Tend to fill roughly half their class through the early pool. And you saw how competitive the early pool was. The regular decision, is a much larger pool, and we're still admitting half the class from that significantly larger pool. So I really do expect there, unfortunately, to be perhaps some major disappointments this year. In fact, in conversing with a number, of my colleagues about, trends that they have seen, one of my colleagues has a large, college counseling practice with a diverse group of students, remarked that what she has seen is that students who did not submit scores, but who are top students, fabulous academics, the right extracurriculars, glowing recommendations, fabulous essays, if they were in the top handful in their graduating class, they probably got in. But if they were just below that top handful of students, there's a better chance that they may have been deferred. So, that's, we don't know that's not, verified by a lot of, hard data, but what, one person in college, who's on my side of the fence in terms of college admissions has seen. Another thing that we saw, at least, one college counselor saw, was a student of hers who applied to a relatively selective school, but a school that has maybe about a 35 or 40% admit rate, and the student was eminently qualified, scores in the low 1400s, easily at the top of that school's previous year's admitted student range, actually got notified by their admissions officer asking if they would like to withdraw their scores. I can't draw any real conclusions why that would happen, but it leaves me a little bit, skeptical that a university admission officer might ask a very high scoring student who's clearly going to be admitted to withdraw scores. You'll see a little data a little further on that might shed a little bit more light on this. Just other things that, I've been hearing about, about applications being way up and acceptances being way down. This was something that was posted online about, Duke University and how many more applications they had this year than last, not just early, just, in general. And that they anticipate in the regular pool, admitting under 5% of the students who are applying. I mean, think about that. If 100 students are applying, 4 or 5 of them will get in. And let's face it, if you're applying to Duke, you're probably a pretty top student, A- average or better. Really have virtually all of the right stuff. I think last year the Duke admit rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6.5%. So this is actually quite a significant drop. More record-breaking information. This one was the biggest record breaker that I've seen from NYU. NYU received more than 100,000 applications. That is the most applications that any private university has ever seen. That's a 20% increase over last year. And think about this, the freshman class is under 7,000 kids. Now, that doesn't mean they're admitting 7,000 students. It depends what their yield, has been in the past. If their yield in the past was 50% of the students who we accepted came, perhaps that means that they're going to be admitting about 13,000 kids out of those 100,000 applications. So that was pretty huge news. Also, Colgate University. So Colgate is a much smaller university, still very selective, upstate New York, 102% increase in applications this year. Colgate's smaller than NYU. It is smaller than almost every other highly selective university. They have fewer than 3,000 undergrads. And they admitted 27% of the students last year. So they're still very selective, but they're not, down to single digits. So even Colgate, a smaller, perhaps not quite as well known because it's very rural, upstate New York, they also had a record, breaking year with an increase of more than 100%. Colgate went on in their announcement about trying to analyze why they went up much more than they had anticipated. Basically saying primary reason was test optional. Also the fact that if you get into Colgate University and your family earns less than $125,000 a year, you're not going to get a loan. You're going to get grant money. They've also partnered with QuestBridge, which is a separate organization that really works great for low-income students, many at under-resourced schools. It helps them apply and enroll in some highly competitive universities. So there is this new partnership between Colgate and QuestBridge. That was Colgate's explanation for why this vast increase. So we don't yet have the full list of colleges that are going to remain test optional for next year, but there have been some really interesting recent announcements. So for example, University of Pennsylvania just today announced that they are extending test optional for this year's current juniors. Very recently, like within the last few days, we've seen similar announcements from Columbia, Williams, Amherst, Penn State. So we don't have this full list yet of colleges that will remain test optional for kids who are currently juniors, but I definitely believe that a strong score can very much be, a plus factor and can really help in the face of test optional. But I would like to show you what colleges are specifically saying about how they are evaluating students who are not submitting scores. So the first thing, and I think that this is, pretty straightforward, is that there is far greater emphasis on the academic record. Now, it has always been far more than just GPA. It's strength of curriculum. But I'm going to go even further than strength of curriculum and tell you that for next year, assuming that many colleges are still test optional, the colleges are going to be specifically looking to make sure that students have at least 5 core academic subjects every year. And basically your core is English, math, science, social science, world language, and I'm going to throw in there computer science as well, because having a background in computer science is key to almost any profession today. If a school offers advanced courses, AP, IB, ACE, which is popular here in Florida and many other states, honors, dual enrollment, whatever it is that the high school is offering, there's going to be even more emphasis on that. In fact, a number of people in the admissions industry are starting to wonder now, with the fact that College Board has eliminated now SAT subject tests and also the optional SAT essay, whether colleges may start to even put more emphasis on other subjects, on other test scores that show specific subject knowledge, which basically means things like AP exam scores, IB exam scores. Yes, Common App asks students to optionally list those kinds of scores. It's optional. Some of us are wondering whether that's going to become more of an influence. I don't know the answer yet, but I can tell you it's something that many of us are discussing. Even if you're not interested in any field of STEM for your future career, colleges definitely want to see you taking math and science as a senior. And if you are interested in something in STEM, they're really looking for the more selective are definitely looking for 1 or even 2 years of calculus, slightly less selective perhaps that you're calculus ready. So in other words, you have finished up high school with pre-calc. And in terms of science, if you're looking at something like, let's say, engineering, hopefully you have at least 1 year, if not more, of advanced physics. But again, even if I want to be an English major, I should be taking whatever the next math course is as a senior, and I should actually be taking one of the hard science courses. And by hard, I mean science that is either biology, chemistry, or physics. I'm not looking at AP environmental science as falling into that category if I'm looking at a pretty highly selective university. More competitive universities generally like more than 2 years of foreign language, 3 years, 4 years, or more. FSU last year, Florida State University, let many of us in the admissions world know that what a high percentage of students got into FSU who had 4 years or more of a global language. Whatever it is that you're thinking about majoring in, there should be evidence of that in terms of your academic record, assuming that you're thinking of majoring in something that is related, just things that you could have studied, in high school. So certainly for a student who's thinking about, let's say, political science, hopefully there are, courses in both AP government courses, perhaps also all 3 of the AP history courses that exist, so that your academic record can support your choice of major, assuming that you are applying to college with a specific choice of major. And if you're looking at really highly selective universities and you're not submitting scores, perhaps you've taken some additional core courses outside of your school. And I don't mean like, I've just taken a couple of dual enrollment courses. Perhaps there's a summer program where you're taking an AP course or a college level course, and that they are core academic courses. And of course, high grades are also going to be looked at. So your transcript is going to be scrutinized even more carefully without scores. And what not everyone knows about is the fact that through Common App, for the school recommendation, one of the things that your counselor is asked to do is to evaluate your curriculum. And it's like a Likert scale. There's actually 7 different responses from, like the very best curriculum to the not so great curriculum. Or there's also one that's like, I think, no basis for evaluation. But if you're applying to one of our nation's most highly selective universities, and you're applying without test scores, I would say that your counselor's rating probably needs to be the number 1 category, which is that she is one of the few best I have ever seen in terms of the quality of her academic credentials or her transcript. The next one down is she's in the top 5%. The next one down after that is she's in the top 10%. So you have to be thinking in terms of how selective that university is, and if I'm not submitting test scores, that I really am counting on my counselor's recommendation, my counselor's rating, to be among the highest ones. There's also going to be greater emphasis on extracurricular commitment. And, in the old days, I think we used to say that colleges were looking for well-rounded students. At least it was that way in the Ice Ages when I applied to college. Now, we're saying colleges are not looking for well-rounded students, they are looking for angled students. So in other words, they're not looking for students who are involved in 6 clubs in school. They would rather see 1 club with much greater depth of commitment, a club that I've been in perhaps for, 3 years or 4 years, and where I've taken, a leadership role, and whether it's an elected or an appointed leadership role, or perhaps I've just taken some initiative to start something brand new. They want to see evidence of the fact that you're a team player, that you have a great collaborative spirit. And it's not just what you have done extracurricularly, but it's like, why have you done that? Or what has been the impact of what you've done? So Common App does give you room to elaborate in only 150 characters. I guess elaborate's an exaggeration, to succinctly describe in 150 characters what it is that you have done. And I'm going to add why you've done it, what you've accomplished. It's a lot to be asking for. Well, honestly, the best way to be able to even further elaborate is the fact that roughly 1/3 of all the colleges on Common App this year, and that number is growing, actually gave you the opportunity to upload a resume. And what I'm sharing with you are resumes from previous students who were highly successful. There is no right or wrong format. Most colleges wouldn't even give you a format. This is just a table format that's organized categorically, and it's color coded because the colors of the university that this student applied to was crimson and white, and so use of that color because it could be personalized for each college. So I think that it's important to be able to have a detailed resume, but that resume really needs to show, and not just your resume, even if you're not doing a resume, just your application really needs to show that your extracurriculars are really aligned with your goals. So that if, for instance, if I'm going to be, let's say, a political science major, hopefully I was, let's say, on the debate team, or perhaps I was involved in student government. Or if I'm thinking about being a creative writing major, hopefully I had a major role in the student newspaper or in yearbook, or maybe I've taken some creative writing classes either in my high school or beyond my high school. If I'm thinking about going pre-med, perhaps I've done some medical shadowing, or I've done some research, and my academics reflect that I've had the highest possible courses my high school offers in biology and in chemistry. Basically, what I'm looking for is a thematic approach. And of course, if there are families of younger students who are listening in this evening, the earlier you can find a focus and have that reflected both academically and extracurricularly, I think is really important. For the most selective universities, I'd say they're looking much more for uniqueness. I haven't just joined Habitat for Humanity, and I'm not downing Habitat for Humanity or any other existing organization. I think they're great, but they would like to see a student who was able to start his own community service activity, and not just for that, doing it alone, but collaborating with other students, with making sure there was a younger student involved so that a legacy could be left once that student graduated. So they're really looking for things that are, perhaps nationally recognized, students who seek out a lot of responsibility, where there are very quantifiable results. It was X number of dollars that were raised, or Y number of members who joined our effort. So things that really could make a student stand out as doing things that are a bit different than others. I just thought I would show a couple of other resumes. This is also actually a table format. Of course, there are no lines. This is a student who was a debater, but you can see not just the quality, but sort of the way this is organized, that it's very eye-catching, and the most important things, are, stand out. a student who was good, in community service as well as math competition. So it's not just, I competed and I was successful and I competed individually or I competed on a team, but it goes into much more detail. And, for this particular student, 2 different extracurricular outreach activities in which the student had, a very major role because it shows initiative. These are things that the student helped start. And by the way, I always put honors or awards at the very bottom of a resume. I think it makes students look much more humble, and I think colleges prefer more humble students. This is actually my niece. Her name has changed, and she's a cheerleader, but it shows you that something that is like completely, a non-intellectual activity. It's not like a math, or debate, but something that is high energy, much more collaborative, much more fun, how that can be a really winning resume as well. And again, colors were chosen because it reflects that university's particular colors. Name and address changed, as well. This is a completely different type of a format. It's not a table. It's really just, a bulleted list. So moving on to the next item that becomes even more important than it has before would be the essay. And a really great essay opens with something that draws you in right away. You can't wait to find out what's going to happen next. It's very revealing of who the author is, what is special about her. Something that happened to her, whether it's serious or funny or something that changed her way of looking at things. It engages the reader in a way that the reader is going to perhaps laugh, perhaps cry, perhaps feel connected. It's incredibly, well written, and there's just a great story to tell. Another way of being incredibly successful is if you have, say, 2 completely different interests, and that you have found a way to sort of combine them. So these are real examples of students with whom my team and I have worked, over the past year. Someone who loved music and also loved computer science. I mean, 2 things that you might say are completely unrelated, but this student will get some special attention because it's not that he combined computer science and music into one particular activity, but he had 2 completely, two completely different things going for him. Or someone who, and these are 2 things that are much more related, very involved in math and very involved in physics. Or dance and leadership. Or how about a community service organization that, will raise, mental health awareness through the arts. Basically, a student with 2 different interests. You might think of this as, for instance, a Venn diagram. So the green circle on the left represents everyone who is a journalism major, and the purplish circle on the right represents everyone who's a psychology major. But the intersection of those 2 circles represents a very small number of kids who are interested in both journalism and psychology. And your interest could be because, you've taken AP Psych, you're on the school newspaper, you might have done a dual enrollment, more advanced psychology course. Your SAT reading writing score is fabulous. Your AP English teacher sings your praises because, your literary analysis and your writing style, is terrific. This is a student who might get much more attention than the student who's purely journalism or purely psychology. So I've taken 2 very popular majors and said, what if someone's interested in both things? You can have a much stronger application that way. So there will even be more emphasis on recommendations. So for those of you who are currently juniors, or those of you who will soon be juniors, it's very important to cultivate a strong relationship with, I'd say, 2 of your junior year teachers, one of whom should definitely be related to what you want to study, if it's possible. And again, there are definitely majors, like if you wanted to go into sports management, there might not be any academic field at all that's related to sports management. So you're not going to be able to find a teacher that's doing that, and having your PE teacher write the recommendation is not going to be the way to go. But for instance, if the student who was interested in both journalism and psychology might have both her AP Psych teacher and her AP Lang teacher write those recommendations. The types of recommendations have to be, so personalized and tell so much of a story about who you are. It's very important to get to know two teachers incredibly well. These are going to be classrooms where you're going to participate. You're going to raise your hand more. You're going to come in early or late and talk to your teacher about something that you're learning to get better clarity on it. Or if you're doing all your classes via Zoom, you're making special arrangements to talk to this teacher to learn more about something that you're studying, basically to demonstrate your intellectual curiosity. It's important that the teacher knows that perhaps you've been helping other students, that maybe you organize study groups or that you tutor. But the words that this teacher writes and the story that he or she tells about you and your very best qualities, really have to reflect on what contributions you're going to be able to make to the classroom when you get to the university. Many colleges will ask for either one or two teachers. They do prefer junior teachers. I don't know of anyone that specifically says, oh, you must do junior teachers. But if you think about it, your junior teachers have known you the closest to the time that you're applying to college, and at your most mature. So I would honestly avoid going back to freshman teachers for sure. I might have to do a sophomore teacher if it's really something very special and it's the only thing that's related to my major. But I definitely like to have at least one of the recommendations related to my major and the other one being the antithesis, something completely different. So for instance, I applied to college as a math major. I don't think that things like recommendations might have mattered back in the old ice ages, but chances are I would have asked my current, my junior year math teacher to write a recommendation, and then something completely different, probably my English teacher or my history teacher, so that college could see two completely different sides of me. Many colleges allow for an additional recommendation. It should most likely not be a teacher, someone who knows you in a different vein. You've done research with this person, you've done a community service project under her leadership. She's a coach, she's a perhaps music teacher, a little bit different, but someone who knows you in a completely different vein and can talk about your personal characteristics, about the human side of you, who you are, as a person, and again, evidence of how you will contribute to that university. And most colleges are also looking for a counselor recommendation. It honestly does not necessarily have to be your college counselor. It could be your academic advisor. It could be the principal or vice principal of your high school, someone in the school's administration who really knows you well. Please do not send too many extra recommendations. Colleges do allow for extra recommendations, but the more recommendations you send, the more it may look like you're begging. So try to keep the number of recommendations very close to what the required number is. It's also very important that your application, totally sparkles. It has to have some kind of a hook, some kind of a story that basically holds everything together. Things where the recommendations are supporting some of the work you've done extracurricularly or your interest in a particular major. Some, not all, but some of your extracurricular activities reflect ways in which you're going to contribute to a college campus, and that have lent support to your area of academic interest. So the application really just needs, to tell a very personal story and hold together. It's like everything about you, thematically related. Does your essay, your personal statement, your supplemental essays, your extracurricular, your academics, do they all support one or two common themes? And is there evidence in your application of the contributions you're going to be able to make to the campus community? And if you wind up submitting scores, they absolutely need to be above the midpoint of the college's mid 50% range. And as I said earlier, if you're trying to decide which colleges to send scores to, see what their mid 50% range was last year for accepted students for SAT or ACT. And if your scores fall well within that range, absolutely submit them. But if they don't fall in that range or fall at the very bottom of that range, you might not want to submit the scores because they might hurt you. I'd like to give you a little bit more very specific data. I'm going to take a look at the university, our neighbor University of Georgia, because we have wonderful admission data, thanks to one of our colleagues also in the test prep industry, who collects this information every year, and to show you that, how many kids submitted with and without scores, and somewhat evenly broken down. More kids submitted with scores than without scores in this case. But I think the point I want to make for the University of Georgia is that the kids who submitted scores were accepted in far greater numbers than the kids who did not submit scores. So we're talking about a very competitive state university. So we're not talking about a super elite university, but look at that difference. 49% of the kids who submitted scores were accepted, and virtually half of that amount of kids who did not submit scores were accepted. And by the way, University of Georgia signed that test optional pledge. So they said test optional is test optional. We're really not going to let it impact our decision if you submitted scores or not. Let's take a look at Georgetown, because they have a restricted early action policy, which basically prevents you from applying early decision to a college. If you're applying to Georgetown, it's a restrictive early action policy. For most universities, when you apply early action, which means you're applying early, finding out early, but you're not compelled to go. There's no commitment to go if accepted. Most colleges with early action allow you to apply anywhere else you want early action, and to apply to any one college early decision. So Georgetown does not allow an early decision to another college. That's why it's called a restrictive early action policy. So they, in their restrictive early action policy, they admitted 10.8%. However, only 7 1/3% of the kids who did not submit scores were accepted. So what does that tell you if the overall acceptance rate was 10.8%? And because they didn't tell us how many submitted and how many did not submit, I think I have to make the assumption that, well, what if roughly 50-50, half submitted, half did not submit? That's showing you that the percentage of kids who submitted scores in terms of their acceptances were accepted at a much higher rate, since the overall rate is 10.8. But the admitted rate for non-submitters was 7.34. And by the way, not only did Georgetown not sign the test optional pledge, if you read their website in terms of what they're looking for in scores, it gives you the distinct impression that you really need to submit your scores, because they're pretty much saying if you have the opportunity to take an SAT or an ACT, you should submit those scores, don't go test optional. And in fact, there was some very similar verbiage from Cornell University, one of the schools that recently announced that they are, well, they're doing an interesting thing for next year. Some of their schools will be test optional, and some of their schools within Cornell will be test blind. But the language on their website specifically says that we anticipate that many students who will have had reasonable and uninterrupted opportunities to take the SAT and/or ACT during 2020-2021 administrations will continue to submit results. Now, they're also saying in there that, they expect you to take the test only if you felt that it was reasonably safe for you to take that test. But that language sort of just leads me to believe that they really do want your scores. That's my interpretation of it. Interestingly, if you read further on their admission website, they do talk about scrutinizing other aspects of your application, and they did use that word scrutiny, and specifically mention the same things that I'm mentioning tonight in terms of things like, your academic record, your recommendations, your extracurricular, etc. And just some statistics from Georgetown, since they're on the screen. They're even giving you their SAT and ACT rates, and by the way, the ranges did increase from last year. The top part of the range did not increase, because I mean, how much can you increase from a 35 or a 790? Not much, but the bottom end of their ranges actually went up slightly. So this year, in the face of test optional, Georgetown SAT and ACT numbers did go up a bit. Okay, Tufts University, definitely a university true to its word. 57 of the applicants, just over half of them, did not submit scores, and guess what? Just over half of them who did not submit scores got admitted without their scores. They did sign the test optional pledge, and they were very true to their word, where the proportions of accepted students were the same in this, for submitters versus non-submitters. They didn't have opposite numbers like University of Georgia did. Williams, incredibly similar to Tufts in the sense for their early decision. A little bit less than half of their applicants did not submit scores, and a bit less than half of their applicants without scores did get accepted. So also very, very true to their word. They also signed that test optional pledge. And just a couple of thoughts from two incredibly well-respected gentlemen in the world of enrollment management, Bob Master, who I mentioned earlier, as well as Bill Conley. Both of them are anticipating that standardized testing will fundamentally change the role in college admission for decades to come. Just something to be thinking about. Just like to end with letting you know that there are some other webinars that you may want to take advantage of that we previously recorded, things that just reinforce a little bit more of what we've said tonight. These webinars have all been previously recorded, and we hope you'll have an opportunity to listen to them. And we also hope that you'll think about us and calling us or texting us or emailing us so that we can help you with your getting into the colleges of your dreams. And let me just see if there's some questions that have come up now that I've reached the end of my presentation.
A couple questions. Do you know what percentage of Florida schools receive applications without scores?
Okay, so our state, the question is, do I know what percentage of Florida schools have received applications without scores? If you're talking about our state universities, I don't know, because they are not allowed to consider any application without scores. So for example, if you apply to UF or FSU, where they have firm deadlines, and they're among our only state universities with firm cutoffs, if you did not have scores, you're not going to be considered. Yes, you could have applied to UCF without scores, knowing that you're going to submit scores, because UCF will be making decisions into the spring, as well any of our other state universities with rolling admission. But none of those state universities has yet revealed their numbers in terms of kids who have applied so far without scores.
Do you know if Amherst said that their admit rate would be about 4% this year?
I haven't heard. The question is, do I know that that Amherst may have said something about their admit rate being close to 4%? It wouldn't surprise me, knowing that, let's say, an equally selective university like Duke is expecting, maybe 4 to 5% admit rate. It may not surprise me that some of the little Ivies, in Amherst, of Williams, of Bowdoin, might have much lower admit rates than they have in the past.
What do schools do that don't rank the curriculum or counselors do?
Okay, so the question is, what do schools do that don't rank their curriculum? Well, honestly, I don't know of any school that actually ranks their curriculum. It's up to the individual counselor to look at your curriculum in comparison to your peers. So for example, if, let's just say you have 4 AP courses your senior year, you have 7 periods in the day, you're actually taking 7 courses, like do not take senior privilege if you're here in Florida at a public school, and 4 of your 7 courses are AP, maybe 1 is honors and the rest are just regular. If that counselor knows that, and that counselor should have this data, that there are many kids in your class who are taking 5 and 6 AP courses as seniors, you're not going to get rated as in the top category. You might not even get rated in the top 2 categories. If you're at a smaller private, high school, that counselor may be even more aware of what everyone in that class is is taking. Just talking to your counselor and saying, hey, I hope you're going to give me a great review. In terms of that ranking, would that help? Gee, I don't know. It depends on your relationship with the counselor. I did a blog on this a couple of months ago. You're not just ranked on your academic record. There's actually a ranking in terms of your extracurricular commitment. Are you one of the very best? And in fact, think of it this way. If you're at the very, very top of your class academically, forget the actual rank, but you know that you're among, a top handful of really outstanding students. The way you're going to get into a university that also accepts that type of student is if also you feel that your extracurriculars would be also at that top rank, that, you are Mr. Extracurricular. Anyway, you may want to just read that blog about how, it's called something like the hidden factors. About, I think, 3 or 4 ways in which your counselor actually evaluates you.
JRA.
Pardon me?
The JRA site.
Oh, it's on the JRA.
www.jraec.com.
Okay, so it's www.jraec.com. So Judi Robinovitz Associates Educational Consulting. We have blogs on that website, and that is, you're going to find that particular blog. In fact, we can actually add that blog, a link to that blog, probably tonight or tomorrow, to this webinar, so that if you wanted to read more about the hidden factors and the way that your high school counselor evaluates you on that recommendation, you'll be able to.
Have you heard anything about schools being more lenient in regards to recommendations due to the virtual setting of school?
Okay. Have I heard anything about colleges being more lenient about recommendations due to virtual? The answer is no, but I have heard a number of counselors on one of the college listservs that I belong to, basically saying that, how hard it is to connect with their students in a virtual environment. It's not like a student can just drop into their office. So I do think that colleges are very sensitive to that, and especially because as part of the counselor recommendation this year, the counselor is indicating what has been the change in the academic environment. And so if they know that a high school has gone completely virtual, or even that you are completely virtual, they probably don't expect as much, let's say, interaction with that counselor. But by the same token, for, let's say, kids who are applying, next year, who are currently juniors, and you are virtual, please make it your business. So, like, get to know your counselor, get to know your junior teachers, make your presence known, even if it's in a virtual world.
Can you talk a little bit about what you include on a resume?
Yeah, what do I include in a resume? And that's probably one of my favorite parts, besides coming up with a balanced college list for a student. One of my favorite parts is working with a student to organize a resume and to identify other opportunities. It's not unusual for, let's say, a student to come to me with like a long list of activities. And so one of the things I try to do first is to sort of categorize them. And sometimes I create, my own categories. It could be things like, let's say, research and community service. That could be a category. So I'm sort of making up my own categories. And I'm looking to make sure that chances are my first or second category is one that reinforces the choice of a major. So in terms of what goes on that, it's any activity that you do in school. And I would normally say, let's say, outside of the classroom, but there actually are certain classroom activities that I would also include. For example, if you're on the student newspaper or on the yearbook, that's class, but you also have very significant responsibility, not only in class, but after class. So anything that you're spending, a lot of time, that you're engaged in, that you really care about other than your academics, would go on there. Things that you do in the summer. Do you work? Do you have an internship? Are you taking courses at FAU? Are you doing research up at Scripps? Are you taking a couple of free online courses because you want to enrich your knowledge about, aeronautical engineering or something like that? What about your hobbies? Do you play piano? Do you dance? Do you paint? It's like, what are you doing when you're not sleeping, eating, hanging out with your friends? What are the things that really move you? And I try to focus on things that I don't think that everybody else is going to talk about. And if you have too many hobbies, if somebody comes to me with a list of a dozen hobbies, that they go fly fishing and they go skiing and, they go snorkeling, whatever, I really try to pick out 2 or 3 that look more unique, if that's really a phrase. Someone who raised a pet pig, and in fact, that was something that one of his essays was about, and pretty cool essay actually. So it's what makes you tick. What have you done to show that you have leadership skills, that you care about things beyond just, let's say normal teenager stuff, that you collaborate, that you come up with good ideas, that you're finding ways to enrich your life outside of the classroom. And by the way, it could even be the fact that you're doing, e-games online. It's, you're playing sports, you're active in, in theater, whatever it may be. It's like, who are you as a kid, not a student?
If you are the top 100 of your class rank, right around the 100 mark, how would taking senior privilege look on your application?
Okay, so the question is, if I'm ranked like number 100 in my class and I'm taking senior privilege, how does it look? Well, first of all, it really depends where you're applying and how selective that university is, and what the rest of your academic record, really looks like. Understand that the requirements to graduate high school are not the same as the requirements to get into college, and are not the same as the requirements to get into a very, very highly selective college. If you're ranked number 100, let's say 400 kids, and you're at the bottom of the top quarter, or you're the middle of, the top half, it means that you're applying to some moderately selective universities. It very much depends upon what the rest of your curriculum is. And I really need to stress here that as much as I talk about how important challenging yourself is and the rigor of the curriculum, not just to get into college, but to be successful once you're there. And it's much harder in college, and you're not surrounded by the support system that you are, at home. It's more important to be a happy, healthy, well-adjusted kid. And the name of where you go to school doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, it's great to have bragging rights. I mean, I can brag about my graduate school all day long, but my undergraduate school is nothing that would earn me bragging rights. But I can say that my more memorable time was probably at my undergraduate, institution. So don't kill yourself if you feel that you need to de-stress and have senior privilege. That's really more important. It's no different than in the summer for someone who's gone to camp every year and says to me, well, I'm a rising senior, and this is my last year at camp, my last year with my friends. We talk about the fact that, depending upon what you want to major in, you may be sacrificing something by not focusing on taking some college courses, even online, in what you're planning on studying in college, and demonstrating that intellectual curiosity. And that being a camp counselor, yes, it's a very gratifying summer to you on a personal level, but it might compromise your college applications. Of course, it depends what you want to major in. If I'm thinking about being an education major, or maybe a child psychologist, maybe going to camp is a great idea.
Do colleges care if you start taking AP classes in junior year, specifically the Ivy League colleges?
Okay. Do colleges care if you start taking AP classes your junior year, specifically the Ivies? Let me broaden that to say the highly elite, anyone who accepts, let's say, under 10% of the students who apply. So first of all, you're evaluated in context. It depends what your high school offers. So there are some high schools where 9th and 10th graders are not allowed to take AP courses. So that means you might not have had the opportunity to start taking them until 11th or 12th grade. But let's just say that you go to a high school where, as a freshman, I could have taken AP Human. As a sophomore, I could have taken AP World History, maybe even AP Biology, especially if I took honors biology, as a freshman. So imagine that I'm going to be competing against my peers at that same high school. I started taking APs junior year, but my friends who were also applying to these same universities started taking them in 9th grade. Chances are they will have a more rigorous curriculum. And I don't, yes, you could say, well, I could now kill myself now, and take a lot more courses junior year and senior year. But that also, it may not be good for your mental health and for your social life. And those things are all, very, very important. The idea is that as you feel ready to embrace the challenge is when you should start taking courses that are more challenging. In March, I'm going to be doing a presentation specifically on the transition from middle school into high school. And one of the things I'll be focusing on is the courses that you take in middle school really help determine how you're going to start your freshman year in high school. And when colleges evaluate your academic record, with very few exceptions, they evaluate your academics starting with 9th grade and include any high school subject that you take in middle school. However, if you're applying to the University of California system, for example, they are primarily focused. Their first cut is pretty much your sophomore year and your junior year.
Do you think the lower acceptance rate for those students who don't submit scores is because the academic transcript is not as strong?
Okay. So the question is, do I think that the admit rate for kids who did not submit scores might be because their academic record is not quite as strong as those who did submit scores? I think for a lot of kids that answer is yes. As I said, I've read that research has shown that your academic record and your test scores tend to be commensurate for about 2/3 of the kids. High academics, high scores, low academics, low scores. So for 1/3 of the kids, they're very opposite, high of one and low of the other. So, are some of the denials? Yes, when we scrutinized your academic record, or we scrutinized your extracurricular record, or we read between the lines in your recommendations, or carefully evaluated and reflected on your essay. Perhaps some of you students who did not submit scores might not have been as strong as a college was looking for, because essentially, I personally believe that without scores, they will be looking for you to have an even stronger academic and extracurricular record, stronger recommendations, and stronger essays.
Do you expect UF to accept more PACE this year, considering so much of our work?
Oh, that's a great question. Do I expect UF to accept more PACE this year? And maybe because of, let's say, COVID-19, I don't think that that's going to impact it. I think the PACE is sort of, let me say, sort of the next level down in being admitted to University of Florida, where you're starting off up to your first 2 years being online rather than in person. I don't think, my gut feeling is that's probably not going to change this year, but you may want to get in touch with Charles Murphy, the Dean of Admission, or someone who, your local admission counselor, specifically to find out whether there will be anything, that's going to change in the way they're going to structure their next freshman class. Anyway, I think that is it for this evening. I just want to, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to email. The email address is down, at the bottom. And stay in touch, stay well, and lots of luck with college admissions. Good night.